What a day to record, guys. It's 7:17 a.m. and we're recording in the morning, partially because of my fault. Not partially, all because of my fault.
So last night at 6:30, we were all ready to record in the studio, lights set up, and Maya gets this call. And I wasn't in the room.
I was so confused because I'm trying to understand what her boyfriend is saying. And he's just like, it's one of those things where like you just have to leave the recording and like it's not a question, Maya. I was like, is someone like injured or like is there an emergency? There was an emergency, but no one was injured.
He just got tickets from his boss for the Warriors playoffs games with the Wolves, and so he was just like, I have an extra ticket, you need to come now, tip off is in 10 minutes. And I was like, what are you saying? Like, you're crazy. And he was like, no, like, we're going to the playoffs game, you're canceling this recording, you're doing it tomorrow. And I was like, okay, honestly valid. They're like $600 tickets.
That is crazy.
Yeah, that is.
And I'm also sick, but that's separate.
That's a separate issue.
Well, when am I not sick?
That's true. You're always sick. Honestly, though, everyone's sick right now, like at work. Literally everyone.
Everyone is.
Okay, well, welcome back to Get the Check. I'm Maya.
I'm Annika.
I'm Priya.
And today we have a fun lineup for you.
It's always fun.
Yeah, I actually don't really know what to say other than fun lineup. For the news stories today, we have OpenAI acquiring Windsurf for $3 billion. And also, we're going to talk about the future of Google search. Apple's SVP of Services, Eddy, just testified in court in the Google DOJ case and said Safari Google search queries are dropping for the first time in 20 years, which tanked the stock price. And then finally, actually, no, I'll leave our last segment for a surprise because it's our like fun segment.
Sure, just read our title.
Cool. All right, should we start off with Windsurf?
Yeah. So OpenAI is acquiring Windsurf, which is an AI coding assistant formerly named Codium, now goes by Windsurf, for $3 billion. And it's OpenAI's largest acquisition ever.
Yeah. And if you're unfamiliar with Windsurf and Cursor, which are the two largest IDE coding assistants, basically these guys forked VS Code, which is an IDE. It's like, you can think of it as a code editor.
What does it mean to like fork it?
Forking means like you take like the application, you make a copy of it, and then you start making edits on that copy. And so like now VS Code and Windsurf, for example, are two different applications, but they come from the same core application, which was a version of VS Code, if that makes sense.
And VS Code is like...
It's like where you code.
It's like where you code.
Oh, it's just like where you write all your code.
Oh, got it.
Yeah. You can think of it as like Notion for docs or something like that.
Yeah.
You get some fun highlighting, some fun tags, you know. I don't know, I like it. But anyways.
I never use VS Code because you only use VS Code like in your real life job.
Oh,
So
really?
like I always used Atom for Python and then I used IntelliJ for Java.
Actually, in college, I used Vim because we were like...
That's crazy.
Well, we were forced to use Vim.
We never had to use that.
And then I switched to Sublime, which is like a
Oh,
more...
I use Sublime too.
Yeah, it's like a more stripped down version of a text editor. Anyways, sorry for getting nerdy.
Annika's like, get me out. Yeah, and these like VS Code forks, I feel like they're being memed on Twitter because it's like you literally just copied this and then you added a foundational model on top of it. So they connect with all the different models. So you can use like Gemini, you can use Claude, you can use OpenAI, like you can use whoever you want. Everyone's like, oh, it's just a VS Code fork.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, but then I felt too insecure because I've already asked a lot of questions.
Well, okay, so the reason why they do it as a VS Code fork and like why it got so popular is that people don't want to learn a new tool. So like if like...
But why is it like an insult?
It's not necessarily an insult. I think it's more like the valuation that these companies are getting for what they've built is kind of crazy. Like in the sense where like it is creating like significant impact. And I think developers are way more productive because of it. And so because of that, it might be monetarily worth it. But in terms of product development, they basically just took VS Code and then they took these foundational models and they put them together and they were like, here you go.
Like, I think it's like the irony of the fact that OpenAI has poured a ton of money into research and has all of these really smart PhDs to make these foundational models. And then like a huge chunk of revenue that they can get is from a couple of college kids building a fork of VS Code. Like
It's just a simple product. It's just a simple product.
It's just like
I
the
see.
irony of like what real product brings. Like, and this is what people always say. It's like it's never really about your idea. It's about your execution.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Windsurf last raised their Series C in August, and it was $150 million at a $1.25 billion valuation. And supposedly there's rumors that they were raising at $3 billion, and instead OpenAI just bought them out.
Yeah, because Cursor is also raising at $9 billion, and they have like a third of their revenue. So I think that's like what their segment of the market multiples go for.
Yeah. And like both Cursor and Windsurf have led to the rise of the term of vibe coding, which I feel like has become so popular on social media, which in my mind is just this idea that you can like prompt some chatbot and then it just like gives you a product. But obviously in practice, it's like still way messier than that.
Yeah.
Well, I think like on an individual scale, that is true. Like if me, myself,
Well, you vibe coded.
yeah, I like don't code at all. But for a TikTok, I was like, let me try out Sonnet 3.7. And so I like vibe coded this closet organizer. And I think things like that are what you're saying. But I think in production for like enterprises, you're not just prompting something and it's exactly
But
what
like
gets
you
pushed.
have a minor in computer science from Berkeley. So it's like you say you like don't code, but like you have a like you're not a software engineer, but like you doing that, like would you say like I could do it too, do you think?
Yeah,
Oh,
I think
yeah,
you could. It's like
100%.
really easy.
I think if you spent like a weekend learning, like you could do it,
Yeah.
which is good because you're increasing access to these tools. Anyway, should we get into why we think OpenAI acquired it?
Yeah, everyone's kind of debating. So I feel like the big thing people are talking about is that their revenue is like relatively low. Like their revenue is 40 million ARR and they're getting bought for 3 billion.
Well, it's 40 million ARR, but they say that they're going to reach 100 million ARR by the end of this year or something like that, right? Like they've made 100 million so far in revenue.
Yeah, they said they're on the road to 100 million. I don't know when.
Yeah. It's unclear what their like revenue numbers are.
so it's like unclear what their revenue multiple is too then.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's unclear. Because like they'll even hide like how many users they have or how many enterprise to free users they have. I think Cursor's more open with their usage statistics.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they definitely are. Because like they always post about it. They were just posting about how they have 1 billion lines of accepted code.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy.
Well, I know Windsurf said they have like over 1 million developers using it. but-
Yeah. Well, Windsurf isn't gonna like obviously post the metrics that don't beat Cursor, like because they're the clear like underdog, or they're
that
the
makes
clear
sense.
second,
Yeah.
so they're not gonna like post their usage metrics as much. But yeah, it gets into the point of like why acquire Windsurf versus Cursor, which that might have been because of relationship issues, but really what do these like IDEs bring to OpenAI, and like why does OpenAI need an IDE? Why can't they just make one themselves? Like they're all valid questions.
Yeah, I feel like they didn't buy Cursor just because Cursor didn't want to be bought and it's like more expensive.
Yeah, because supposedly they were in talks last year, and I think even the year before that potentially. Like I know they had 2 rounds of conversations, and both times it didn't end up in anything. So whether it's because Cursor didn't want to be bought or because Cursor was too expensive for them, who knows?
And OpenAI has like a pre-existing stake in Cursor, right?
Yeah, they invested, I think. Yeah.
So I feel like it was probably more expected that they'd buy Cursor from that perspective then.
yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks Google's going to buy Cursor now.
Yeah.
That's what everyone's saying,
Yeah.
which would honestly make sense.
What about like Anthropic?
Well, they have Claude Code.
But I could still. I mean, Cursor and Anthropic have a good relationship, though.
But anyway, so in terms of like why they decided to even buy one of these companies to begin with.
There's a few different plays. There's like the revenue play, which I think based on what we just talked about, it probably wasn't purely a revenue play. If anything, it's more of a product play of this is a product that every company is going to need to have. So like Claude has their own version of it and they might work on that. And then like OpenAI has Codex right now, but it has like super low adoption. No one's really using it. And so they probably would have to build out their own version of this and instead chose to go down the path of like acquisition.
Why is no one using it if it's like such a simple product to build?
I think Codex also integrates with the terminal and it's not an IDE.
Yeah. Like forking an IDE is still tough.
But like what's the difference between it being in the terminal and forking an IDE?
It's kind of like using a Notion versus using like a really, really, really bad version of Microsoft Word.
Okay, so OpenAI just didn't put the time to develop the product well.
No, they're 2 different approaches. Like people use
okay.
the terminal in its own way. And I think like it has its own value.
Got it.
It's just two different. They're just different.
Well, yeah, like I guess like Notion versus like a bad text editor is like not the best analogy of like of IDE versus like terminal.
Yeah.
It's kind of just like terminal is like you can literally do anything like on your computer. You can spin up instances. It's like also for DevOps workflows, which is all around the like actual hardware infrastructure and using that to like run your code, versus IDE is just purely like the software, running it and like making like edits and like testing
and like debugging it.
Well, you can also debug in like terminal,
but it's like so annoying to do.
Yeah, so like terminal is like kind of like your control plane for everything, and then IDE is like specifically just for like writing your software.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And then the other side of it is whether they bought it for the data, which is kind of what everyone's been talking about also on Twitter, and that you have all of this human feedback that you're getting because you're looking at who's accepting your code, who's pushing your code to production, like what new questions are you asking, all of these things. And so that's where people think OpenAI is like really looking to extract value.
Yeah, and like what they're saying here is that when you're accepting a piece of code or you're denying it or you're editing it, that's more objective feedback than you saying thumbs up or thumbs down, because you're actually using it. Like a chat editor, you don't actually know what happens with it. And apparently Sam has said this, he was like, so much money is spent on people writing like thank you to the chat bot and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah,
or
there's
hello, right?
Yeah, or hello, or like just like all of these like things that you don't really need to be doing because it's like actually not in your core workflow of what you're affecting. And so being in that core workflow, you can get a lot more feedback and data for the next set of training.
Yeah, like I feel like I use ChatGPT to figure out SQL queries all the time. And like sometimes I just give up because something's not working. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes I use exactly what it sends me. And sometimes I use it and I edit it. And it has like no way to distinguish between those three scenarios what happened. And like I never respond to it again.
Yeah.
So like only something like Cursor or Windsurf would really have that data.
Yeah. And then the other part of this is that OpenAI can gain feedback on not only their own models, but other models as well, which I think is huge because they're lagging in like coding support in general. Like Gemini 2.5 and Claude Sonnet 3.7 are way better than OpenAI's most, I think, best model at coding.
Yeah.
And
do you think their plan is to start with that and then improve their models and then kick the other players out? What do you think their plan is?
I think people ask like, why did they have to acquire? Why can't they build their own thing? Like they could have spent time building their own thing, but it would have taken them time to gain adoption. And I think they're trying to reach AGI, and this is a core part of reaching AGI, which is like getting access to this data to train their models. And if you put that at a lag time of like 1 to 2 years versus like getting access to it now, getting that data now, like that speeds up your progress towards AGI by a lot against your other competitors, because Anthropic is already getting a version of it through Claude Code, and I think they're worried about that. And I think they're worried about how far they're behind. And then there's a second part of like, why is coding such a P0 for these model players? Like you could totally focus on healthcare or just like building out a better personal assistant. And I think part of it is that like coding is actually like the easiest domain to crack.
Yeah.
Because it's such a rules-based system, and there's like such good.
That's super straightforward.
It's straightforward. There's verifiable results. There's no like you saw with the sycophancy update where like the chatbot was being a lot nicer. It's like objectively like it got worse, but people can't really verify whether they like the model more or less because it's not objective anymore, right? Versus in the coding world, the unit tests work or it doesn't work.
Yeah, I feel like it's like there are a variety of domains that are easy to crack. Coding's one of them. Another good example would be like language. Like I know Duolingo said that they have like an AI first policy, and I think that's another example of a good domain. But then I think it's a combination of what domains are most easy to crack and then account for like the dollar TAM value. And like the dollar TAM value of like every software engineer in the country is like insane. And then on top of that, when you account for adoption rates, because with like something where you want like more training data really fast, you would also want it to be in an industry where like all these people are going to adopt it.
Totally.
And like developers like day to day are adopting like the newest AI tools, which is
it's honestly crazy.
It's like way faster than.
And there's less regulation, right? Like there's no one's
companies.
Yeah, like no one's regulating what tools I use, but as a doctor, like people are regulating like what systems you use when you're typing your patient data in, because of all the compliance and stuff. So I think it makes sense. I think also the model players believe that coding will help them reach AGI the fastest.
Yeah, I like
There's, like,
maybe
the-
that's true.
And maybe there's like the AI 2027 part of it where like they want coding to automate R&D.
Yeah, that does make sense. Where it's like coding is like internally valuable as well.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
like you need code to do AI research, which is like the mission of the company.
Yeah.
Versus like something like translating a language isn't going to help towards like OpenAI's mission.
Yeah.
Yeah. And going back to all of this, like training the model, one of my questions was that for most enterprises, they don't let OpenAI train on their data at all. So like even right now, if you're using like Azure OpenAI, you're blocking them from actually training on your data. So I was like, in this scenario, and Windsurf has the same policy. So I was like, in this scenario, how is OpenAI actually going to learn from their data? And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the whole feedback loop, because even if they don't have the actual lines of code, they still see what your feedback to their response is. And so they can use that for their RLHF loops, which is like reinforcement learning, human feedback. We used to talk about this like all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they can basically use that to build better models.
Yeah.
So is Windsurf receiving the data in like a hashed or encrypted form?
Yeah. So what the CEO specifically said, his name is Varun, is that enterprise code isn't used directly. They can use aggregate patterns from user interactions, like how developers accept/reject suggestions and their workflow preferences, and that can inform model improvements. I'm unclear on like how you can like use a reward signal if you don't have the core training data set. Then there was a bunch of Reddit forums that say they like obfuscate. How do you say that word?
It's like what I'm saying.
Obfuscate.
Yeah.
It's just like a hashed or encrypted or like.
Well,
I don't think it's like
not hashed.
Yeah, I
or
don't think it's
encrypted.
that though.
It's like they change
I
the
think they
variable
use
names.
simulated data, because what I saw was they use like simulated data that represents the real data. So because like even if it's hash or encrypted, like you would still know what it says, so you can't use that.
It's not. Yeah, I think it's like something as simple as like changing variable names. Like okay, when you're in Berkeley and you're trying to change your code to like pass like the cheater check, it's like
All you have to do is change the variable name.
yeah. Or like there's like some version there is some version of like refactoring you can
very
do.
secure.
So it's actually unclear if they're allowed to obfuscate enterprise data, because like, are you allowed to obfuscate enterprise data to turn it into a training data set and then use that towards your models? I'm not really sure, and this is a gray area that I couldn't really answer for myself. I do think should be a bigger conversation of like, if they're worth so much and OpenAI is buying them, and then like probably 90% of their customers are enterprise customers, and that's also where the like best data lives, because everyone can vibe code a project now, but like to actually build a scalable system is still very hard. And like coding agents aren't still good at like using the context of the entire code base to like suggest you a good response. So like if you're truly trying to create an agent with automated work, you actually do need access to a lot of these huge enterprise systems that aren't available on the internet at all, or public data. And so like, is obfuscating okay? Or what are they doing? How are they getting around this problem? Yes.
Well, like either way, you're kind of just like pushing these enterprises into a corner, because like they have to adopt these tools. So whether or not OpenAI is using your data, it doesn't matter. Like if you're not a part of the AI race, you're already too far behind. And so I think in a way, like unless the government is going to come in and regulate it, they do have an upper hand in that enterprises have to use them.
I know there's a zero data retention policy, but I don't know how that relates
I feel
to
like those policies are fake. Haunting.
Well, I just have to believe that like if you're gonna pay that much to acquire a startup like that, that means you're gonna use some version of enterprise data that you find useful.
Yeah.
And like, what does that mean? Does it actually follow the policy? Is there an audit with it?
I'm sure that
There aren't
enterprises
audits.
just agree to like, oh, the data can be used to retrain models, but a specific person can't look at it. And I feel like that's probably
Yeah. No, I agree that it's definitely some shady shit for sure.
No, like in the contract though, it says
Contracts say a lot of things though.
yeah, this means your code or code derived data is never stored in plain text on Windsurf servers or by any
exactly in plain text on Windsurf servers.
Yeah, but it even says code derived data, which is like obfuscating. So I don't know.
No.
I actually don't know.
But
Not convinced.
stored, yeah, not convinced either. But I guess like back to the AGI point, I actually think that there's like a more short-term goal, which is that they already launched Operator, which is what, like 20K a month or something.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically like an operations person on your team, and it's agentic. And I think they want to launch a coding version, I would assume. Like that only makes sense. And
Well, Windsurf already launched that.
but OpenAI hasn't launched
Yeah,
one
yeah.
yet.
OpenAI hasn't, but Windsurf launched that.
They want to make it better.
I've seen a lot of people that are using the multiple instances of the agent to do all of their different work at the same time, which is kind of crazy. So you'll have it open on like a bunch of different ones.
Yeah, that is
And people
cool.
are even using like Cursor and Windsurf in conjunction too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess like more short term, they'll release their own coding agent since they now have Windsurfs. And
Yeah. And then a lot of people on X were talking about, what does this acquisition say about OpenAI's AGI progress? Like, I think the quote was,
well, I guess it's like there's these theories that internally an AI lab could be way further than they portray externally.
yeah. So it's like, if you have a coding agent, which is good enough, like if OpenAI had a coding agent internally, which is good enough, why did you need to buy a third party company and use their data? And like, maybe the answer is, oh, because you don't have they're not that far ahead.
I feel like OpenAI is probably like as far as it pretty much seems they are.
yeah.
Really?
I would agree.
Well, there have been like whistleblowers about like what's going on there. So many people have left. And while I'm sure there's silos of the company that are like probably under strict NDA or like don't talk to other parts of the company, I think it's unlikely that they'd get way further along like towards AGI and like the public wouldn't know.
Yeah. Well, I think given how hard they tried to acquire Cursor and then pivoted to Windsurf, it's probably clear that they're reaching some like ceiling that they can't break past, and they need access to new data.
Yeah.
I think that's like my biggest guess.
Yeah, they're also spending so
Sure.
much money on data right now. Like the other thing is companies like Mercor and Scale are providing this labeled data to them, but it's so expensive.
It's like millions a year.
Yeah.
So maybe that's also just like a pure cost play too, to like save money.
Probably a combination of all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I wanted to bring up is like how this narrative kind of fits into their recent pivot to being a nonprofit.
I think one of the takes I saw was that they are trying to prioritize research and go back to doing all of that type of work instead of prioritizing profitability, especially as they move back to like a nonprofit model basically. And that there have been a lot of launches. And I think people think of OpenAI as the consumer product.
Yeah.
And so it's just moving back towards more research focused.
Sama did the numbers and was like, oops, not going to be rich enough, need to like spend more time on research.
Yeah.
It's tough to say though, because they also just had a major hire, which was like, her name is Fiji Simo. I might have mispronounced that, but she turned like Instacart around, and she's been known for monetization strategy at like multiple large tech companies.
Yeah.
And they just hired her, and I feel like there have been a lot of whispers of like ChatGPT incorporating ads, especially like more recently. Like I feel like people have been talking about that.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how much I believe that these things are like mutually exclusive. And I feel like the nonprofit decision was also just a legal issue versus like they actually redirected their mission back to that.
Well, I'm excited to see how Windsurf evolves under OpenAI and how they stay competitive to Cursor. So next we're going to move on to Google. The future of Google search specifically. Apple's SVP of Services, Eddy, testified in the Google DOJ case and said Safari Google search queries are dropping for the first time in 20 plus years. This immediately dropped the stock by 8%. And this is really important because Google reportedly pays Apple around $20 billion to remain Safari's default search engine. So if Safari or Apple in general decide to use a different search engine, this could rock Google's dominance in the search game.
Yeah, like basically when you go into Safari, you're on Google search. Obviously, when you go into Chrome, you're also on Google search. And Safari doesn't have like their own version of Google search.
Yeah. And the reason all of this came up is because of the antitrust trial that's going on right now with Google search, and if it needs to be broken up because it's a monopoly. And this $20 billion was a huge piece of it, because deals like that are the reason that Google is able to maintain what the DOJ is calling this monopoly.
Like the whole premise of this court case is that the DOJ says that Google employed monopolistic practices and started all these deals with like phone providers, and paid them a lot of money to integrate Google search into all the phone providers so that the adoption of Google search was just higher in general, and like that's why Chrome did so well.
Like it is the
and it is
reason
true.
that
It's
they
like
became so successful.
DuckDuckGo is like their competitor. Like you'd have never even heard of their competitors.
Exactly. And then
they have 90% of like traditional search,
and that's down from 93 in their peak. But who the fuck is hammering right now? Like, why do you need to hammer at like 8 a.m.? Okay,
that's shocking.
It's like really loud.
Yeah.
No, it's really loud, like in general. What are we
Is that
hammering?
like a short-term hammer, like long-term hammer.
Okay, I say we just go.
Okay.
So you were saying it was at 90%, and this is actually down from its peak at 93% in 2022. So shareholders are like, whoa, we're losing our dominance.
And because of the 8% drop, I think my question was like, is this a warranted drop in the market or not? Because that seems really dramatic.
It is a little dramatic because they just had their earnings and like they were up 10% because like their revenue from search was up overall too.
Yeah, like Apple basically says the Safari queries have dropped for the first time in 22 years, but the overall queries have grown.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I would say, when I'm on my phone, I actually am more likely to use ChatGPT or something because I have the app. But on my computer, I would still say like my default is always to go to Google.
I like used to think, okay, how straightforward is this question? If there's like 6 sub questions underlying it, I know that I have to ask all of those sub questions to Google, so I'm just like gonna ask a person if I know that they're an expert.
Put that person to work.
Well, it's like I know you're like an expert in politics, or not an expert. But like, I know you understand politics
Priya
pretty
and I
well.
were talking about how we need more individual brands, so this is perfect. Just
That is
brand me as an
perfect.
expert in politics.
Yeah, well, you clearly know a lot. Like you know all of the like different like tangents to go down, right? And so sometimes I'm like, oh, should I just ask Annika or should I ask ChatGPT to go down those tangents? But I think like literally 2 years ago, I would have been like, I have to ask Annika, otherwise like I would not know what to search even.
Yeah.
And now you're not being asked anymore.
No, I still call Annika in a panic.
She called me the other day and was like, what is like the pros and cons of affirmative action? And I was on the phone
I think
with
I've
my
asked her
friend.
that too.
Anyways, this is a long tangent to say that I do think that the search queries are up and ads could, like the ads market could grow even faster than it was before because you have like AI search underpinning the growth of that market in general.
I actually don't feel super confident that AI is going to help their ad business because 75% of queries get answered on the page itself now, and you don't click a single link. And even like Google obviously has their Gemini AI summaries that we've all read, and I feel like those summaries are definitely not as good as like Perplexity or ChatGPT. Like you're much more likely to still click into a link, at least for me personally. But I think like as the percentage of queries where someone actually clicks on a link drops, it's going to be a lot more likely that companies invest in like Meta ads or like TikTok ads versus Google ads. And that's not even accounting for when OpenAI starts going into the ad business, which I think we're not that far away from considering Perplexity's already done it.
Maybe there's this like medium term where the search ads business drops because like users aren't clicking as much, but then wouldn't the actual ad just become that much more expensive? Like,
But
doesn't
people
it,
probably won't pay more to have that ad spot.
because it's like not as valuable
Yeah, it's
anymore?
like
You would
not
just-
good ad real estate compared to like Instagram where like you're guaranteed someone's going to see it.
But then also like they have to figure out that problem because like the huge valuations that all of these companies have is a kind of like because they believe that they can monetize pretty well with ads, right? I don't know.
Just Google.
Yeah, I think the difference is like Google has built their moat around this.
Yeah.
I don't think companies that advertise on Google like necessarily have built their valuations around advertising on Google. I think
Yeah.
a lot of them, that's just like one way to advertise.
It's like
There's
one
also like
avenue.
Meta. There's also like TikTok. Like for example, when TikTok was going to go down, like obviously it came up at like many companies, like that's a major ads channel, like, but you just immediately diversified. Like there's always going to be places to advertise.
Yeah. TikTok said they made $10 billion in US ad revenue last year, and which is like pretty good for what they are like right now. And I feel like that'll only increase because we're also seeing users like adopt that type of content more and more.
I also wanted to talk about like the headline of like, is Google making its search actually worse?
No, I just think they're trying to like SEO optimize for it. And so I don't think they're actively trying to like make it worse. I just think they're trying to do what would make them the most amount of money.
Well,
makes
it's
sense.
also like there's like SEO slop now, right? Where like companies have spent all their time trying to create like all of these blogs to SEO optimize, which wasn't necessarily the original intention.
And now
For the
they're seeing
user.
people add like Reddit to the end of every single search they do because they're like, oh, I want to only see the Reddit answers. And if I type something in, that's not what's going to come up. Because I think Sundar Pichai like mentioned this himself.
So like in response to that, they actually made Reddit appear more often. They like went into the algorithm and it was just like make Reddit appear more often. And now it does. And now people are like, okay, now Reddit is artificially appearing too often. It's
Can't
like
win them all.
Reddit
Yeah.
does appear too often, I think. Like Reddit
Really?
always appears for me, yeah.
So I actually wanted to talk about this a little further because this headline came out of the court case. Essentially, in the court case, they're like, oh, we have evidence to believe Google search is making it worse. And the underlying evidence was that Google ran this study of like, if we were to remove Wikipedia, how would that affect our revenue? And essentially it was like, oh, it'll bring our like ads revenue down by 1%. And so then like, and that's like a huge amount, right? But then the lawyers spun that and was like, oh yeah, the 1% equals 0%. And so basically if Google tries to make their search queries less helpful, it doesn't affect their revenue that much. And then use that as a way to like argue that it's making search worse. And like
They're not intentionally making search worse.
that they're intentionally making search worse and they're just focusing on ads. And like,
like because if search is worse, it doesn't matter for their revenue.
exactly. And like, while I do believe the overall headline, it's funny that the actual evidence underpinning it itself was like not that strong because there is evidence to point to like people thinking search has gotten worse over time. I think that is like a little fake because it's a combination of people's like expectations being higher. Like 2005.
But I don't think that makes it fake, actually.
I don't think the actual vibe of like Google search getting worse is fake because like there is clear evidence to say that like they did force organic results 64% down the page between 2013. Gone to study on
4% is a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. Like between 2013 and 2020. And then they also have increased the size of shopping ads by 34%. This is all because in the last, I think 5 to 6 years, this guy, Raghavan, took the role where he was both the head of search and Google ads. And like those, and being the head of both search and ads creates this issue where
Because
like
there's like misalignment.
there's misalignment because like for search you want to be as helpful as possible and then for ads you want to make the most money, and when you have like the head of both being the same person, they're going to align the incentives of the org together. And that's when Google search ad revenue also started popping off too, and like you started seeing this difference in the page results and stuff.
But it's like maybe we're seeing it as misaligned, but it's actually aligned.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say,
Exactly.
like, I think that it does make sense that it's the same person doing both because it's like the side of the business that makes the most amount of money.
Yeah,
And so they have to be.
Yeah, I mean, it's like misaligned for the consumer, but aligned for the business.
Which is
overall.
exactly why there would be a monopoly case against them, because they're saying that your incentives are not aligned with the consumer, which all
Totally.
makes sense. And then to your point about people saying search is getting worse, like part of it is like the SEO stuff, and part of it is Google not being as helpful as possible. And then part of it is the rise of competitors, which is ironically what Google and Apple are trying to point to with like Apple's testimony in support of Google. I was like reading about how it's hard to figure out when to strike at a monopoly for like the DOJ or like the
Okay, there's literally no way.
okay, basically in the
This is actually unreal.
Oh, it looks like he might be moving away.
Okay.
Okay.
So in the life cycle of a company, they're a startup, then they're a major player, then they're a legacy player, and then they basically have like a downfall, right, as like new startups take their place. And so Google right now is going from like a major player to a legacy player, I would say. And Google and Apple are trying to overemphasize Google as a legacy player, specifically in the context of this case.
Yeah.
Which is part of why people think that like on one hand, Apple is saying that Google search queries dropped and pointing to conversations with other competitors like Perplexity and OpenAI and Anthropic in order to have a real critique of Google's product not being clearly the number one player. But then on the other hand, it's also just to play to the judges' sympathies, to be like, this isn't a monopoly and you don't need to break it up because like the natural life cycle of capitalism is doing its expected job per se.
Well, I think Perplexity and OpenAI both testified that Android's default settings and Google's contracts with phone manufacturers make it nearly impossible for competitors to gain traction. So they were just talking about how hard it is for them to actually get any pie of these deals, because like Perplexity and OpenAI have now been around for 2 to 3 years. Like they have a good amount of user adoption, at least on their own products in general, and so the next natural step is to go for partnerships, and they're just testifying that they can't enter any partnership because of Google. And I do think there's a reason to break up the monopoly now, because you could say that you're hurting like the progress of AI.
Yeah, on the Android point, Gemini quadrupled the number of users that it had, and it basically was exclusively because of Android users, since it's automatically just like the default result. And so like to your point, they literally are getting their users on like something like Gemini because they're the default on Android, and so it is huge.
Like their search monopoly could lead to their AI monopoly, and then that could make like them be the controllers of AGI and ASI. Like, because essentially there is like an argument to be made that like, and we don't know this for sure, but like the first player to reach AGI and ASI just kind of like wipes out the market. And does like Google have an unfair shot at that?
Yeah, and then does profitability just like not even matter because it's shifted so much towards just having AGI that it doesn't matter that you're down this amount? Because there was a study done, I think a year ago or something like that, where it basically said for every 10% of queries that get moved from Google to AI, even if it's like Gemini, let's say, you lose 1.5% of your operating margin. Like Google would lose that. And so
because the queries are more expensive to run.
Yeah, like the queries are more expensive to run, but also you're getting a more direct answer when you're asking a question. So you're not, like to your point, you're not going and clicking on ads. So I think it's like a combination of both of those things.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
They're definitely in like a tough spot of like, how like regardless of the monopoly case and like what happens in the court, like as a search product, how do they pivot from just being like a bunch of blue links to actually like an AI chatbot, or is there some middle? And like Google's way around it is just to do a bunch of experiments and like roll out a bunch of kind of like small versions and iterate towards the best future. Is that fast enough given how fast AI is developing? And I would say like, honestly, my answer would be like Google is moving at a fun enough pace, because if you think about it, like we still have not hit, what is it called, the middle majority for AI chatbots. Like we're still in the early adopter phase for OpenAI. So I think like as long as Google stays at their pace, I don't think it's like too far behind.
Well, because I think like we have a really skewed perspective of all of this because we work in tech. We're like in the industry. We literally have this podcast and we're talking about it all the time. But yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah, apparently ChatGPT's share of the search market is below 1%, which I thought was crazy.
I was unclear if it's like if they're counting like all chatbot queries or if they're just counting like ChatGPT search, which is like a separate product.
As of recently, right?
Yeah.
But like for a while it was the same. So.
Oh, okay. I have no clue.
So then there's a question of what is the future of search for a player like Google. And I think that it'll be to lean into AI, obviously. You might start seeing sponsored summaries. So like having ads within the Gemini AI summary.
Oh, that would actually be so annoying.
But like that's probably what OpenAI is going to do. Like Perplexity already has ads in its platform. I could totally see a future where the Gemini answer has ads and it just like says ads and then has a normal answer the same way like Google does right now.
But I feel like the current version is better than that version, like where it's like a summary and then a bunch of product and ads after.
Are there product ads in Google's Gemini summary?
Like right after.
No, after, yeah. I see that being the right model for like, potentially the right model for like OpenAI and Perplexity to adopt, because like they are more chatbot-like. Google already has cemented this like kind of like blue link page. Like, do we think they'll ever get rid of the blue links is my question.
I think it'll be a while. Yeah. I feel like it won't be now. I actually had a question for you, Maya. Do you ever go on Stack Overflow anywhere? I was like thinking of websites that would be dead.
Oh, no.
And I was like, wait, for coding,
For coding, I don't go to.
Well, yeah, that's like an
Florida.
actual thing. Like Stack Overflow has died.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
and it's because it's all forum-based content, and I don't think people are contributing as much anymore too.
But people still like appreciate Reddit.
But Reddit,
No, I know it's different, but it's like a similar concept.
I think Reddit is different because it's people trying to find like alternative truths.
yeah,
Versus Stack Overflow is people trying to find
The truth.
mainstream truths.
yeah. That I was
Because
gonna
it's
say
coding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like when you're trying to find a mainstream truth, you'll just like use ChatGPT. But when you're trying to find like alternative truths.
That makes sense.
And like all I mean by an alternative truth is like you kind of want to know like on the
It's more
ground what people
opinion-based.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, you want to know
Yeah.
opinions because it's no verifiable truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think like the broader consumer trend that I picked up on was just that like because we have shorter attention spans, we also expect that out of our search results. So it goes back to like the expectation thing that you were talking about. When I search for something, I now expect either within the first few links or within like one query that I will get exactly what I want, which doesn't happen with Google.
I still use Google for stuff like topic and then Harvard review because I want to know what like Harvard's
Yeah.
like professors said on this topic, and like that is the only way I can get that information. I can't find that information in Perplexity and ChatGPT because it'll always give me some summary, and I'm like, no, I just like want all the links and sources because I just want to read source material. When you're talking about the future of search, it's just like how do you always incorporate like being able to get to the source material at the end of the day regardless of the summary, or feeling like that there's not a burden that you have to like overcome to go find the source material. And I feel like right now it is a burden in the ChatGPT and Perplexity interfaces.
But I don't think it's a burden in the Google interface.
Exactly.
Because like the Gemini links are so good.
Yeah, they're good.
Yeah.
So I think that's what they do well.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So that brings us to our final story, which is that Partiful is finally monetizing, which is funny because they once quote tweeted a tweet and were like, VCs gave us money to party. We have no monetization strategy. And that seemed to be the case because under the monetization section on their website at the time, it just said links to merch. But they've now introduced...
I've never seen Partiful merch before.
I have not seen Partiful merch either, but that was their primary monetization strategy. But now they have a group order feature where through Fizz, which is a 21 plus app from Instacart, hosts and guests can order drinks and snacks for their event. And it's pretty cool because like if we were hosting an event at our apartment building, our friend could add like beer, and it's like they will just pay for it at checkout because they added it. But like as a host, we can also add the bulk of things. But then if like someone wants like their own thing, maybe they have like, you know, the vegetarians can add their vegetables.
I can add my Casamigos.
Priya can add her Casamigos. Everyone gets
You
what
can
they
add your
want.
lemonade.
Yeah. A big question we're trying to answer is that like, is this kind of move, do we like going to be a viable venture for Partiful? Like, because like right now I think they're valued at like 120 million with like no revenue, which makes sense given the amount of user adoption that they've gotten. We know Instagram was bought for what, $1 billion and had like no revenue at that point too, and now look at what it's become. So it like makes sense. The question we're trying to answer right now is like, what are the clear outlets for Partiful to make money?
Yeah. And so right now they have 500,000 monthly active users. And if you assume like 5 to 10% of the actual events that end up happening because of those 500,000 users use this group order feature, and the average cart is like $60 to $100, maybe a little bit higher in big cities. All the math like works out if you assume that they're making like 10 to 20% of a cut of like what Fizz is making to be like low six figures. Obviously we don't have the exact math, but like my back of the envelope math got me to like low six figures. So I feel like this is probably the start of like a much larger strategy versus like the strategy.
Yeah, and one of their recent tweets said, how does Partiful make money by making hosting way easier? And so I think that's the approach they're going down, and the first like foray into that is drinks and food. But there's so many things when it comes to that. There's like photographers, rentals, like all of these other things as well.
Yeah, there's like a clear natural story of just like, hey, plan a party for me, and like it gets it all together. And I think they're trying to test if people really want to like use Partiful as an avenue to buy things and to plan things. And like you said, like food is the first step. I was just thinking about it because like they could also integrate with like DoorDash, Uber Eats, and all of these like grocery delivery services or food delivery services, like especially grocery for Uber Eats, their margin right now is 4%. For like Partiful to take revenue share from that, that's like a significant dip in margin. And so like Partiful, I think, has to prove that like they're bringing extra users to like like significant extra volume to like Instacart or DoorDash or Uber Eats or any of these players.
And they're probably not.
Yeah,
They're definitely not.
probably
Yeah.
not.
You're definitely going to order that regardless. Like, I feel like what Partiful adds to it is like the ability to coordinate who's paying for what. But then it's even more like they are doing it in a 21 plus app called Fizz. And I feel like the time when people really care about splitting money at parties is like pre-21.
Yeah. I actually thought about this and I was like, okay, like in a world that they like build out all these partnerships, they're not going to make enough money from this, obviously. I think there's two things. There's one, like the marketplace approach that like we were talking about earlier, where like they somehow become a two-sided marketplace and like they have event vendors and they become like they're like the DoorDash and the Uber Eats themselves, but for like event vendors and event management. I'd actually think that's a less likely option. I think the more likely option is probably like ads and seeing if ads is a good channel. So like Instacart, DoorDash make a ton of money from like their restaurants or like stores spending on their platform on ads. DoorDash I think makes like 100 million and Instacart makes like close to 900 million a year, which is like 30% of their revenue. So I think there's a world where like Instacart grocery vendors will want to spend ads on Partiful, and then Partiful will get a significant chunk of that revenue.
Yeah. That makes sense. There was the Cut article that went viral too that was like, did you know Partiful's founders worked at Palantir? Which I thought was funny because like, of course they did.
Yeah, but also I thought the article was kind of crazy because the way it was framed, they were like, oh my God, they're these horrible people that worked for like Peter Thiel and they took money from A16Z and Mark Andreessen is like a Trump supporter. And it's like, okay, they took money from like one of the best venture capital firms, which like totally makes
like
sense.
the whole
also
valley
everyone
has taken
does, like
money
everyone
from,
does. Yeah, and it's like if we're boycotting Peter Thiel companies, like let's boycott PayPal now. Like what are we doing?
That it would be tough to boycott all those companies.
I also saw a TikTok about it yesterday.
Me too.
Did you see?
Was it
and everyone was canceling Partiful.
I knew people. Well, I think it's just like people don't draw a logically consistent line in their cancellations.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
think that's what the issue is. If you follow the logical argument of like Palantir is extremely evil out of like even looking at corporations today. I'm just saying like theoretically.
Yeah.
Then you say like anyone that's been associated with that, like you are too evil for me to in any way contribute to your monetary success. I can actually follow that line of logic. I just think it's like literally 1 in 4 PMs at Palantir start a company, Priya told me the other day. So in that case, like you better be keeping track of the companies you're boycotting. If you don't want to use companies that have Trump supporters funding them, just delete your phone. Like there's literally not a single app on your phone. Like 1 in 2 people in the country voted for Trump. I obviously didn't, and I like don't support that way of thinking, but like there's no way you can divorce like your monetary, like your consumer spend from like Trump.
Well, the other thing is like
supporters.
she worked like Shreya. She worked there from 2014 to 2018. Like first of all, that was like pre-Trump. Palantir was nothing like what it is today. It's also like sometimes people just need a job out of college. Like there's so many reasons, and I just don't think that that's a valid reason to cancel someone because she also after that has come out and been like, I don't support what they're doing. Like I don't support all of these things.
Well, the TikTok was like, what do you think they're doing with your data if they're not making money? Like basically implying that they're selling it back to Palantir. And I was like, brother, Palantir has way bigger data that they're trying to get than our Partiful invite. Like Eddy, because it was like
weaponizing Partiful was crazy.
Wait, it was literally like, why do you think you need to log in when you get into the Partiful app? And it's like because they want people to create accounts because that like helps their monthly active users and stuff when like you have an account on Partiful and like you log into the same account. But they were like, yeah, like they have connections to like the surveillance state. And I was like, do you really think that Palantir's strategy to get like our names and phone numbers is going to be fucking Partiful? Like that's a best case scenario that I've ever heard. Like what?
Yeah. Oh.
Like they're definitely working directly with the government. And
Yeah, I know. It's just like, it's all crazy.
I love Gen Z.
You're Gen Z.
No, I know. I just think it's like they're
No,
so
it is
funny.
really funny.
I actually have an appreciation for being like let's like figure out like where companies are getting money from and what they're doing with our data. I just don't think people are like logically consistent in their suggestions are like, let's cancel Duolingo, let's cancel Partiful. And I'm like, in the grand scheme of companies that I think are ethical, like they're actually pretty high.
Yeah.
Like, wait till you hear what everyone else is doing.
Yeah.
What?
Totally.
Like Duolingo, the bird that's teaching you a language because it has like AI powered algorithm you're gonna cancel when like you probably have like, I don't know, like
Way more
cancel
bigger-
Instagram. Why are you on TikTok?
Yeah.
TikTok is
cancel
more
TikTok.
evil.
Yeah,
than
TikTok is more evil.
Duolingo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's bigger
True.
fish to
Wow,
fry.
I just thought of that. Why
Yeah.
are you on TikTok if you're complaining about Partiful and Duolingo?
Oh, well, that wraps up our episode. It's been a fun one because there's been a lot of construction noises in the back. You might have heard that, and we'll try our best to cut it out.
Well, we can't cut it out.
No promises.
No
See
promises.
you next week.
Bye.
Bye.